Hi, this is Dr. Helen Smith with PJTV. Today I'm at the beautiful St. Clair Shores in Michigan, where the first ever International Men's Conference is being held at the Veterans for Foreign Wars building. We are going to be talking with attendees and speakers from all over the country and all over the world about men in our modern society, so stay tuned. Did you ever think this conference would come off today? First of all, can you tell us a little about it for the viewers who don't know? And then did you think this was going to come off?
Well, there were questions. Because it is a conference that addresses issues that affect men and boys, there has been some resistance to it even happening. We did have to change venues. There were doubts at times, but as you can see, it is going on, I'm very happy to say, mostly because of an incredible staff of people at AVfM that have made it work.
Why do you think there was such hostility against a conference that just wants to talk about issues pertaining to men?
Because we live in an ideologically driven culture where it affects gender issues, and there is one narrative out there. I think it's the feminist narrative right now that dominates, and that there is a lot of pushback against challenging that or questioning it, which is what we're going to do.
Paul, that's great. Do you have a website or somewhere that people can reach you if they want to learn more about these issues?
Yes, they can join the more than 500,000 people a month right now at avoiceformen.com, where there is a library of over 3,000 articles, video programming, audio programming, radio shows that address all the issues that we're going to be addressing here at the conference today.
Do you think the average man out there really knows about these issues, or do you think this is just a general way of informing them? Because when I wrote my book, Men on Strike, it seemed like there were so many guys who sort of felt there was something wrong but didn't really know how to put their finger on it. And it seems like with this conference, you're really focusing in on those issues and helping the men and the women who support them to really understand more about what's happening.
I think you put that very, very well. I think that most men and most women in this culture know that there's something wrong going on with men and boys, but articulating it because of the past half century of disinformation about what men are about, what their lives are really like, for them to articulate it is very difficult. And what this conference is going to do, and we are going to broadcast this on YouTube as well, is give people an opportunity to hear this for the first time, and I think we'll have a tremendously powerful response to it.
How do you think women's groups will perceive this?
Part of our affiliations are with women's group, the Leading Women for Shared Parenting, and there's a number of others. They will receive this very well because they're supporting us in what we're doing. But there are people, and there are men's groups that will disagree with this, and we're perfectly open to that. Our point is that we have to have an open venue and an open discussion about these ideas.
What are some of the arguments men's groups would have against a men's rights group?
Well, there's organizations like NOMAS, the National Organization for Men Against Sexism, and other men's groups that are very pro-feminist, and they are just as critical of us as...
Why are all the voices feminist men or feminist voices in this culture? Why are there no more masculine men or men just who are independent or, you know, just have other ideas?
To put it bluntly, that's where the money is. There is a lot of people with skin in this game from the feminist camp. There are academic careers that are built on this. There are entire gender studies programs. There are social services. There is legislation like VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, that involves hundreds of millions of dollars for women-only program. And this is, it's a big money game.
So it's mainly political?
Yes, I would say so, absolutely.
Well, Paul, thank you very much. We may be coming back to you to get more information, and we look forward to this fascinating conference. So they call you Dr. T over at A Voice for Men, or a shrink. You also have a website.
That's right, shrinkformen.com.
And Dr. T, how did you start all that?
Really, I thought I was going to just have another abandoned WordPress blog. Several years ago, I had a dear friend, who was going through a particularly bad divorce, and I counseled him, advised him, supported him through that, and he encouraged me by telling me that I should start writing about this information publicly, because if he had access to it, 20 years ago, he would have saved himself a lot of pain, misery, and money. So I opened a WordPress blog, and for about the first 2 years, every month my traffic doubled.
And so you work with men who have borderline girlfriends or wives, or just abusive?
But primarily abusive. Sometimes there's an official diagnosis, sometimes there isn't, but from the behaviors they describe, it certainly sounds like it meets the DSM criteria.
What is the DSM criteria for, say, a borderline personality?
There are 9 symptoms, and anybody can go look that up, but I primarily think of it as a pervasive pattern of emotional instability, fear of abandonment. Sometimes there's self-harm behaviors, sometimes there isn't. There can be promiscuity. I think that, sorry, I'm blanking, but you can...
A lot of anger, right?
A lot of anger, tend to lash out at people when they're hurting. They tend to think emotionally and oftentimes will confuse their feelings with facts. They tend to see themselves as victims, even when it's pretty evident that they are the architects of their own misery and are oftentimes the aggressors in relationships.
Why would a man why would they pursue a person like this? Why do men pursue women who are so angry and frustrated?
Well, they don't always appear that way at first. These people I would describe them, people who have these issues, as having Jekyll and Hyde personalities. So they can be incredibly lovely and charming and sweet, and then something triggers the rage and the mask comes off. Sometimes they can keep the mask on for a while. That's what is referred to as a high-functioning BPD, but that doesn't mean that they're better or that they're not as ill. It just means that they're better at hiding that angry side of themselves.
So, but why would a man stay with a woman? So once you found out, you're a guy out there, and you find out like this woman has, anger issues, or more than anger issues. I mean, a lot of people get angry, but this is an extreme form of that. Why would a man stay?
Well, if there's children involved, sometimes they stay for the children because they know their odds aren't good at getting primary custody. Even if they can get a diagnosis, they want to be able to buffer and protect their children from that same kind of rage and abuse. Sometimes they grew up in a family that was chaotic, dysfunctional, and perhaps had a mother who had that disorder, so on some level that seems normal and familiar to them, and they're still trying to heal their early wounds and abuse by trying to get a different outcome in this relationship. Of course, that's not going to happen. They just end up replaying the same childhood traumas over and over again. Some men get addicted to the drama, and when they're in relationships with healthier, more stable women, it feels empty, kind of like I had a gentleman who used to take a lot of ecstasy, and he said after a while, like, he couldn't feel happy or good without it. And I think that happens in these relationships sometimes. They're just so drama-filled and intense that when you go to something that's stable, that most people would be like, wow, this is a really nice relationship, it's peaceful, it's easy, they don't feel alive.
And what do you say to men, who are involved in a relationship like this? What would you say? Could you give maybe a couple of tips to them? How do you cope with it?
Get help, get support, find a therapist who understands these issues, who's not going to counsel you to stay in the relationship, to be supportive and understanding of her because she has problems. You have a right not to be abused. You have a right to be treated well, and you have value. I would say make use of your support system. That's your friend, your family. Is oftentimes when men become involved, when you get involved with an abusive personality, one of the characteristics of abuse is isolating the target from their support system because it makes the target easier to control and manipulate. So that's very important. Reach out to your friends, reach out to your family.
But I think most people, for men, don't really understand that men can be victims of this, and they just think that guy ought to man up and move on. I mean, that seems to be a common thing that men tell me, or that they don't really have the support, or, where are they going to go if there's nobody who believes what you're saying or who doesn't understand it? Do you think for men it's just harder?
I think That's the case for some men, but I think that's changing, especially with the internet, and you can find people with similar experiences just by typing in a few basic search terms. So I think the information is getting out there, and I know on my website and forum there are a lot of men and women who the amount of peer support shared is incredible, and they all have these common shared experiences that, particularly for the men who perhaps don't have a great offline support system, that can be very helpful. So if you don't have supports offline, you can certainly find them online.
And where do people find your website?
shrink4men.com.
And you're here at this conference today. You gave a talk today, and what did you hope by attending this conference? What did you hope to achieve by being here today?
Just raising some awareness for these issues and showing my support to all of the other people here who are working so hard to do the same.
Here with Jonathan Taylor, who has a website that is especially interesting. Tell us about it.
Thank you. Yes, I'm the founder and publisher at voiceformalestudents.com. It is the leading website for educational equity for men and boys. I really work publishing a lot of news and commentary on the website, but I also work to create a lot of resources for parents, educators, students, advocates, basically anyone who is involved in advancing the conversation on educational equity for men and boys.
And how did you get interested in this? And how did you get signed up with Voice for Men in this conference?
Well, I'm a former higher education instructor through Texas A&M University, and so when I was an instructor of composition and argumentation in that system, I came across some instances of bias against men and boys, and I also came across numerous instances in which the scholarship on gender issues was lacking in intellectual rigor, perhaps to put it charitably. And I began to, this piqued my intrigue, and then I studied it a little bit more, and then I realized that these were not localized incidences, but really part of a national or really international trends that were working against the goals of educational equity, gender equity in education, and doing great harm to men and boys.
And what are some of the issues? Can you name us the 3 top issues you think that men and boys are facing in education today?
Well, one of the chief issues, particularly in higher education, would be retention issues, particularly graduation rates. Here in the United States, when it comes to associates, bachelor's, master's, doctorates, if you just look at the trends of graduation rates over the last 40 years, there has been a staggering nosedive in the amount of degrees that have been conferred upon male students, especially in associate's degrees and master's degrees, most especially. So,
why do you think boys don't want to go to college anymore, men?
Well, I think perhaps it may be that they feel pressured to enter into the workforce immediately because there is that old male provider role that may be working against them. Also, the reality is that we just don't have a lot of resources for male students who are entering college. We have, books upon books of programs for women, for integration, for assistance, for empowerment, for financial aid, whereas the reality is that this just doesn't exist in anywhere near the same degree for men and boys, despite the fact that they are doing relative to women rather poorly in higher education.
Now, what about minority boys? Are there more scholarships and things for them, or do they also suffer from some of these problems? We're talking about the bias.
They too suffer from some of these bias issues. There tend to be more resources available for male students of color, but really the problem that we run into is that people in higher education, really the culture of higher education, especially in the humanities, they only really tend to recognize men and boys as a group as deserving of help or compassion in as much as they fit into some of these other groups that they actually do kind of tend to have compassion and concern for, such as, gay men, black men, Latino men, low-income men. And that's not to say that they don't need our help too, they certainly do, but the reality is that men and boys as a group, when you look at the problems that distinctively affect them, they just aren't getting the attention that they need proportionate to the issues.
And what do you think people can do to help? How would we change this?
Well, one of the great ways is to, right now, just create the conversation, help create the conversation, because there are not enough people talking about this issue. There are not enough people researching this issue, and we really have a decent amount of data. But what we really need are people who have the courage to create that conversation from a perspective, a new conversation on educational equity, which includes a perspective of compassion for men and boys as a group. That is a critical element which we really need to develop more of. And I have a lot of resources, a lot of information, a lot of activism tools at the website of voiceformalestudents.com if people would like to avail themselves of that opportunity and get involved in the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. This has been Dr. Helen Smith for PJTV. Thanks for joining us today.